I use a lot of fragrances throughout the course of a month, but my current favorite fragrances are the ones I'm enjoying a bit more than the rest. So even though I've had a lot of fun with a ton of freshies throughout the summer, it does feel good to finally be at the end of August. I've really been craving fragrances with a bit more depth to them. So I use a lot of fragrances throughout the course of a month and sometimes up to 4 days. It really depends on what mood I'm in and the performance of a fragrance. These are some of my current favorites. Now I would absolutely love to know which are some of your current favorites. So my craving for this actually started like 2 or 3 weeks ago. This is one of my fragrances for life. It's also one of the absolute best sweet tobacco fragrances ever made. I bought 2 of these just to sort of safeguard myself from any sort of future reformulations. This is pretty much all about a warm and sweet dose of tobacco. It has Parfums sort of a signature vanilla to it, which I think is one of the best vanillas ever made. And it's also quite spicy with quite a prominent, but at least to me, quite smooth dose of cinnamon pushing through. The vibe here is definitely something playful, flirty and sexy. So perfect if you're going out or if you're going on a date. Now the performance of my 2 bottles of Parfums de Marly Herod are definitely above average. I don't feel this is beast mode. However, I've received so many comments saying that this has been reformulated and that the current performance is not the same as older bottles. I feel Parfums de Marly Herod is for someone who really enjoys sweet tobaccos like Strong Redew Tobacco, Spice Bomb Extreme and Tom Ford Tobacco Vanilla. So next up we have Jean-Paul Gaultier Scandal pour Homme Le Parfum, and I've actually used Scandal, the newer Scandal Intense, quite a bit through summer. However, I've reached for this quite recently and really enjoy it. This is so good. To me, Scandal pour Homme Le Parfum is basically sort of, in a nutshell, the more woody, less sweet version of the original. And the sort of a caramel-like kind of sweetness of the OG is definitely a lot less intense in this, even though I do pick up hints of it. This is basically all about sandalwood, quite a prominent dose of vanilla, and it also has an aromatic touch. The vibe of Le Parfum is definitely more elegant and sort of a classy if you compare it to the original, which I feel is definitely more sort of a flirty and playful. This is definitely so good for going out since the performance is also quite good, but I mean you can enjoy it to work or school as well. So next up we have this thing right here, and I really feel I gotta do a proper comparison of all the ones in this line. However, I do think this is probably my absolute favorite in this line. So this is a leather, but to me it's leather done in quite a sort of a light way and also in a mass appealing way. This is absolutely gorgeous. So Salvatore Ferragamo spicy leather to my nose opens up with quite a bit of freshness. So you got a bit of citrusy, spicy and aromatic freshness. This has a fantastic dose of sage, but the twist that I feel really makes this quite a unique one is saffron. I mean, I'm not sure, but I do think it's the saffron in spicy leather that gives it that thing that I really can't explain in words. However, this to me is pretty much all about a smooth, mass appealing dose of leather together with a bit of creamy sandalwood and a gorgeous nuanced dose of freshness. The vibe here screams class and elegance with a bit of sexiness, and I've actually put quite a dent to it. So the performance on my skin is a bit above average when we're talking about projection, but somehow, some way, people still can pick up on it. The longevity though is definitely better. Moving on to one of my all-time favorite musk focus scents, and this to me is absolutely intoxicating. This opens up with a gorgeous citrusy fresh kick. To my nose, it's an extremely smooth kind of citrusy freshness. When this thing starts to dry down, you get a fantastic dose of musk. This to me is quite a sort of a clean, almost transparent kind of musk, but with a ton of personality to it, thanks to a gorgeous floral touch and a bit of fruitiness. Musk Therapy has magnolia and blackcurrant, which really gives it its uniqueness, and it also has a super creamy dose of sandalwood. So this is definitely a bit woody. You have what I feel is an almost sort of a transparent kind of musk, even though that transparent kind of musk has, at least to me, a ton of personality, and it's definitely a bit fruity and floral. The vibe here is anything you want it to be. Spray this on when you are going on a date, and you will most likely land a compliment or two. Spray it on with like a nice tie and suit, and you will definitely smell extremely classy and elegant. And I almost forgot to tell you that Musk Therapy smells absolutely fantastic when you layer it with other fragrances. So moving on to this, and I'm pretty much always rotating my way through the Guerlain L'Homme line, and this to me is in a way sort of the most boozy version of that sort of a signature Guerlain L'Homme Almond. So this has that almond that makes the entire line so unique in a blend with a quite boozy feel to it. It also has a smooth and soft dose of leather and a bit of sweetness to it. So this is basically almond. It's a bit boozy with amaretto, and it has a bit of sweetness to it and a bit of soft leather. This is rich and almost creamy. The vibe here is incredibly classy and elegant, but with quite a prominent dose of sort of a sexiness to it. And I do feel this is for someone who wants something to make them stand out. Performance is actually a bit better now than when I did my review it, and I do feel this probably might actually be the best performing in the line. So the next one is one I gotta be in the mood for, but when I'm in the mood for it, I tend to use it like for a month straight. This is Tom Ford Noir, the OG. This is very different if you compare it to Noir Extreme and Noir Extreme Parfum. This to me is more smooth than those are. Definitely more sort of a mysterious and also more sort of a classy and elegant than both of those. This is so complex and extremely well made, and also quite a hard one to explain, but Noir to me is definitely smoothly woody. I do feel there's quite a prominent dose of smooth woodiness to Tom Ford Noir, the Cologne. It also has quite a noticeable dose of violet, so this is quite powdery, but the powderiness of it is, at least to my nose, not of the sort of a super rich or dense kind. It also has a gorgeous, smooth, spicy kick to it, and I also feel once this sort of settles down on your skin that it has a fantastic sort of amber warmth and shine to it. So underrated, so classy and elegant. The performance could be a bit better, however. The performance on my skin is a bit above average. I feel Tom Ford Noir Extreme gets all the sort of a glory, however this is definitely equally sexy and a lot more elegant. So moving on to a fragrance from Dior that when I did my review of it back in like January, I concluded that review by saying that it smells good for sure, but that it didn't blow me away, and that I did not think that it was as good as one of my fragrances for life, which is Dior Homme Parfum, and I pretty much feel the same way now. However, I actually really enjoy Dior Homme Parfum. To my nose, Dior Homme Parfum 2025 is also woody and powdery, much like the original Parfum. However, the powderiness is definitely not as sort of a thick and dense and rich like the OG Parfum. I also feel that the sort of overall feel to this is that this is a more sort of a drier and in a way sort of a cleaner composition if you compare it to the Parfum. So Dior Homme Parfum 2025 could in a way be described like the sort of a more wearable or versatile version of the OG Parfum. I can clearly pick up on it when I spray it on, but like an hour after that, I can barely smell it anymore. However, it does seem like people around me can pick up on it even though I can't. I've received compliments for Dior Homme Parfum long after I thought it was gone. I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe I'm going nose blind, but yeah. So moving on to one of my favorites in the 1 million line from Rabanne, and this opens up in quite a spicy and citrusy intense way with a fantastic dose of lavender. The opening is smooth though. The dry down though is my absolute favorite part of 1 million Royal, because that's when this thing basically turns into something that to my nose is all about creamy woodiness together with quite a prominent dose of sort of an amber warmth and shine. But here's the thing, and this thing is something that I get more of the more I spray. So I do tend to overspray quite a bit with 1 million Royal. I'm getting like a bubblegumish kind of sweetness to this. And it's really that part, the creamy woodiness of it, the amber warmth and shine that it has, and that sort of a bubblegumish kind of sweetness that I absolutely love about it. Performance on my skin is definitely above average, going into strong. And this is definitely date night worthy or when you're going out. I'm pretty much halfway through my body bottle of 1 Million Royal. It feels so good to be back to this one. So moving on to an Oud and Rose fragrance. Now Oud and Rose is a classic combo. However, I'm extremely sensitive to that combo. It's got to be done sort of in my way. The rose can't be too rosy, if that makes sense, and the oud can't be too dirty or sort of medicinal. One of my absolute favorite Oud and Rose fragrances is Dior Oud Isfahan. Arabesque gives me a bit of Oud Isfahan vibes. However, there's also a clear difference between these two. This is definitely very oudi, but the oud in a way feels less sort of dirty and less sort of polarizing if you compare it to the one in Oud Isfahan. Another very noticeable difference is that the rose in Arabesque feels actually more sort of a rosy if you compare it to Oud Isfahan, and I actually need to wait for at least like 5 minutes before the rose sort of softens up in the way that I like it. Do not blind by this. That goes for any Oud and Rose combo, because Oud and Rose, that combo is so unique and everyone loves different kinds of ouds and different kinds of rose. The vibe here is definitely extremely classy and elegant, and this is something I feel is sort of a reserved for special occasions when you really want to stand out. I'm getting extremely good performance from my bottle of Arabesque. So here's my sort of a recommendation when it comes to Oud and Rose fragrances. That combo is very unique. It can easily be too much for those around you. So that's one reason to take it easy with the sprays. Number two, this is quite a potent kind of scent. So I really don't feel you need any more than like 2 or 3. So moving on to a leather focused scent that I usually reach for when I want something that is quite different compared to scents like Tom Ford Ombre Leather Parfum, because the leather here, at least to my nose, is of the sort of a softer and less intense kind. Cuirs is mostly, at least to my nose, about a smooth dose of leather, so the leather here is definitely quite prominent, but I do not find it to be as intense as in fragrances like Tom Ford Ombre Leather. The twist to Cuirs, at least to my nose, is its woodiness. So this has a nuanced dose of woodiness with a bit of oud. So it's woody and leather with what I feel is quite a smooth dose of leather and a spicy kick, and it has a bit of amber warmth and shine to it. Performance is definitely above average, but I do not feel Cuirs is anywhere near the sort of a strength and intensity of fragrances like Tom Ford Ombre Leather or the Parfum. So moving on to a fragrance that gives me quite strong vibes of one of my fragrances for life, an epic head turner, which is Santal 33. However, there's a difference. This is Santal Dan Sha, and this is basically mostly focused around a smooth dose of creamy sandalwood. The opening is where you get a spicy and citrusy fresh kick together with that creamy sandalwood. The mids is where you start to get quite a prominent dose of powerness together with that sandalwood. And the drawdown to me is really nice because I do feel that the woodiness of it becomes quite nuanced. This is still quite creamy and balsamic in the drawdown. It's a bit sort of a warm and spicy and quite powdery, but not in a sort of a rich and dense way. Armani Santal Dan Sha is definitely for sandalwood lovers, for someone who absolutely loves quite woody scents with quite a prominent dose of powerness to it. And I also feel that Dan Sha in a way is for someone who enjoys fragrances like Santal 33. The vibe here is extremely classy and elegant, but classy and elegant in what I think is quite a casual way. So this works just as well for like lazy Sundays when you're at home doing nothing, or when you dress to the nines and going out. Projection could be a bit better. The longevity is definitely better than the projection. This is a fragrance I rate like a bit above average, and I do recommend to spray more rather than less. This is one of my current favorites. So next up, a fragrance I know I've been talking about a lot lately, but it's been pretty much one of my favorites since I bought it, and this to me is basically like the version of myself or the Parfum that I feel has a more nuanced and more exciting kind of freshness to it. So it also has a dose of freshness, much like the Eau de Parfum, but I do feel the freshness is a bit more sort of a nuanced and more exciting. And it also has quite a prominent dose of orange blossom, much like the OG Eau de Parfum. However, the floral side of Mysf L'absolu, to my nose at least, feels definitely more nuanced with more layers to it if you compare it to the original. This is also quite woody, softly woody, much like the OG, but I do feel perhaps that the the woodiness of Mysf L'absolu is a bit more intense than the OG, which is quite soft. I'm not gonna say that much more about Mysf L'absolu. I highly recommend to check out my Mysf comparison. I'm gonna link to it above. This has been a favorite of mine since I bought it. Make sure you like and subscribe for more. Make sure you check out my other videos over there, and I'll see you in the next one.